I never thought I would live to see my 40th year, much less return to the plantation to find the nightmare that awaited me. My name is Samuel Washington, and this is the story of how 3 years of forced labor building fortifications during the War of 1812 stole what little freedom I had, how my return revealed a horror I could never have imagined, and how the son I had raised in bondage became something more terrifying than any overseer I'd ever known. Let me begin where it all started to unravel in the spring of 1809. I was an enslaved man on the Thornhill plantation in Virginia, about 30 miles south of Richmond. I was 37 years old, had been enslaved since birth, and like my father and grandfather before me, I knew no other life. But within the brutal confines of that system, I had managed to carve out something that resembled a life. My wife Hannah and I had what was called a broad marriage. We belonged to different owners, but had been given permission to marry and live together. Hannah was enslaved on a neighboring plantation owned by the Hartwell family, about 3 miles from Thornhill. Our master, Richard Thornhill, allowed me to visit her on Sundays and some evenings, which was more consideration than many enslaved people received. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. We had managed to have this arrangement for 15 years. Hannah was everything to me, strong, beautiful, with a spirit that slavery had tried but failed to break. She had dark skin that seemed to glow in lamplight, eyes that could convey entire conversations without words, and hands that could heal the sick or comfort the grieving with equal skill. She worked as a house servant for the Hartwells, which meant slightly better conditions than field work, though it came with its own dangers and indignities. We had one son, Samuel Jr., whom we called Junior. He was 13 years old in 1809. Because of the broad marriage arrangement, Junior officially belonged to the Hartwells, like his mother. But Master Thornhill had agreed that when Junior turned 14, he would be purchased by Thornhill so that father and son could work together. It was a small mercy in a merciless system, and we were grateful for it. Junior was a complicated child. He was brilliant, taught himself to read by watching the Hartwell children's lessons through windows, could calculate numbers faster than most educated white men, and had a memory that retained everything he ever heard. But there was something cold in him that troubled both Hannah and me. He showed little emotion, rarely smiled, and seemed to view the world and the people in it as pieces on a chessboard to be moved and manipulated. "That boy don't feel things like other children," Hannah would say to me during our precious time together. When little Mary fell and broke her arm last month, all the other children were crying and upset. Junior just watched, curious-like, as if he was studying an interesting insect. "He's learned to guard his feelings," I would respond, wanting to believe it. "Smart boy like that in our situation. Maybe it's safer not to feel too much. Feelings can be dangerous for people like us." "Maybe," Hannah would say, but doubt lingered in her eyes. "But Samuel, when I hug him, it's like hugging a wooden post. He tolerates it, but don't return it. And the way he looks at people sometimes, calculating what he can get from them, it worries me." I understood her concern because I shared it. Junior never showed affection, never seemed to bond with other children, never appeared to care about anything except advancing his own position. When other enslaved children would share food with each other, Junior would hoard his. When someone was being punished, Junior would watch with what seemed like scientific interest rather than empathy or fear. When he was praised for good work, he showed no pleasure, only calculation about how to leverage that praise for advantage. But we told ourselves this was survival. We told ourselves that a black child in slavery needed to be smart, needed to be calculating, needed to guard his heart. We made excuses because he was our son, and we loved him even as we worried about what he was becoming. Then came the War of 1812, and everything changed. The war between America and Britain created chaos throughout the South. There were fears of British invasion, rumors of slave uprisings encouraged by the British, and a desperate need for labor to build fortifications and support the war effort. In Virginia, enslaved men were hired out by their owners to the military to work on these projects. The owners received payment, while the enslaved men received nothing but harder labor under military overseers. In early 1812, Master Thornhill was offered a substantial sum to hire out 20 of his enslaved men to work on fortifications being built near Norfolk. I was among those selected. The choice wasn't random. They wanted strong men in their prime who could do hard physical labor. At 39, I still qualified. I was given one day to say goodbye to Hannah and Junior. We met at the usual spot, a clearing between the two plantations where we had spent countless Sundays together. Hannah tried to be strong, but I saw the fear in her eyes. "How long?" she asked, holding my hands tightly. "They say 6 months, maybe a year at most," I told her. "The fortifications need to be built quickly." "A year," she whispered. "Samuel, I don't know if I can—" "You're the strongest woman I know," I said, pulling her close. "You'll manage. And Junior will help you. He's nearly grown now." We both looked at Junior, who stood a few feet away, his face impassive as he watched us. Even in this moment of family separation, he showed no emotion. "Junior," I called to him, "come here, son." He approached, and I put my hand on his shoulder. "You're the man of the family while I'm gone. Your mama needs you to be strong, to help her however you can. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," he said, his voice flat and formal. "I mean it, Junior. Your mama is everything. You protect her. You hear me? You take care of her." "I will," he said. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't read, something that made me uneasy. I embraced Hannah one more time, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her in my arms. "I'll come back," I promised. "No matter what, I'll find my way back to you." "I'll be waiting," she said, tears finally falling. "I'll be right here waiting." Junior stood stiffly when I tried to embrace him, tolerating it, but not returning it. I told myself it was because he was trying to be strong, trying not to show weakness. I wanted to believe that. The next day, I and 19 other men from Thornhill Plantation were chained together and marched toward Norfolk. It was the beginning of 3 years that would test everything I thought I knew about suffering, endurance, and survival. The work in Norfolk was brutal beyond description. We were building fortifications, earthworks, batteries, defensive positions in anticipation of British attack. The labor was backbreaking, digging, hauling earth and stone, working in all weather, under the supervision of military overseers who made plantation. Overseers seemed gentle by comparison. We worked 12 to 14 hours a day, sometimes more. The food was inadequate, barely enough to sustain men doing such hard labor. We slept in crude barracks that were freezing in winter and stifling in summer. Disease ran rampant, dysentery, typhus, pneumonia. Men died regularly, and their bodies were simply replaced with more enslaved laborers hired out from nearby plantations. But physical suffering wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the complete loss of even the small dignities we had managed to maintain on the plantation. At Thornhill, I had been a skilled carpenter and blacksmith, respected for my abilities. I had my Sunday visits with Hannah, my small community, my identity as a husband and father. In Norfolk, I was just another black body, indistinguishable from dozens of others, worked until exhaustion and barely acknowledged as human. There was no communication with home, no letters. Enslaved people weren't allowed to send or receive mail, no visits. We were too far away and too tightly controlled. No news of how Hannah was managing, how Junior was growing, whether they were safe or suffering. That isolation was its own form of torture, the not knowing. The 6 months we were told the work would take stretched into a year, then 2 years. The war dragged on longer than anyone expected. The fortifications we built were constantly being expanded, reinforced, modified. And the military had no incentive to release us. Our labor was cheap and our owners were being paid, so why send us back? I survived by holding on to the image of Hannah's face, by remembering the feel of her hand in mine, by promising myself that I would endure whatever was necessary to get back to her. Some men gave up, they grew ill and died, or they simply lost the will to live and faded away. But I held on. I survived fevers that killed stronger men. I survived injuries that should have crippled me. I survived because I had to, because Hannah was waiting, because I had promised to come back. In late 1814, the war finally began to wind down. The Treaty of Ghent was signed in December, officially ending the war. But the process of releasing hired slaves and returning them to their owners was slow and disorganized. It wasn't until March of 1815, 3 years after I had been taken, that I was finally put on a wagon heading back toward Richmond. I was 42 years old, but looked much older. My hair had gone gray. My body bore scars from 3 years of brutal labor and several serious injuries. I had lost weight despite the heavy physical work because the food had been so inadequate. But I was alive, and I was going home. The journey back took several days. When we finally arrived at Thornhill Plantation, Master Richard Thornhill himself came out to inspect the returning workers. Several hadn't survived the 3 years. He would have to account for those losses with their owners or estates. But those of us who had survived were evaluated like livestock being returned from market. "Samuel," Master Thornhill said, looking me over, "you've aged considerably." "Yes, Master," I said, keeping my eyes downcast as required. "Can you still do carpentry work, blacksmithing?" "Yes, Master. My hands still remember the skills." "Good. You cost me considerably in hiring fees. I expect you to work off that debt with quality labor." The concept that I somehow owed him for the privilege of being hired out against my will to do brutal labor would have been laughable if it wasn't so crushing, but I simply nodded. "Yes, Master." "Go get yourself cleaned up. Report to the workshop tomorrow morning." "Master," I said carefully, knowing I was taking a risk, but unable to stop myself, "might I have permission to visit my wife? I haven't seen her in 3 years." Master Thornhill frowned. "Your wife?" "Oh, yes, the woman on Hartwell's place. I suppose you've earned a visit. You have until sunset tomorrow. Don't be late returning." "Thank you, Master," I said, relief flooding through me. I was given basic provisions, clean clothes, some food, and shown to the cabin I had lived in before. It was exactly as I had left it 3 years ago, my few possessions still sitting where I had placed them. It was eerie, as if time had frozen while I was gone. I cleaned myself as best I could, changed into the clean clothes, and then immediately set out toward the Hartwell plantation. It was late afternoon, but I couldn't wait. I had to see Hannah. I had to know she was all right. The 3-mile walk felt interminable, despite my eagerness. My body was exhausted from the journey, but my heart pulled me forward. I rehearsed what I would say to her, how I would hold her, how I would tell her about the 3 years, or perhaps how I wouldn't tell her. Some things were too dark to share. I arrived at the Hartwell plantation as the sun was beginning to set. The big house looked the same as I remembered. I went to the quarters where the house servants lived, where Hannah had her small cabin. As an enslaved person from another plantation, I should have reported to the overseer first to announce my presence, but I couldn't wait. I went directly to Hannah's cabin. The door was closed. I knocked. "Hannah, Hannah, it's me. It's Samuel. I've come home." No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Hannah?" The door to the next cabin opened, and an older woman named Bessie looked out. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Samuel? Lord have mercy, we thought you was dead." "I'm alive, Bessie. Where's Hannah? Is she in the big house working?" Bessie's expression shifted to something I couldn't read, pity mixed with fear. "Samuel, you need to talk to the overseer. You need to—" "Where is my wife?" I demanded, my voice rising despite the danger of a black man raising his voice on a white man's property. Samuel, she ain't been right for a long while now. That boy of yours, Junior, he—" "What about Junior? Where are they?" Bessie pointed toward a small structure behind the main quarters. It was barely more than a shed, used for storage. "Junior moved her there about a year ago. Said she was getting difficult, needed to be kept separate. Samuel, something ain't right with that boy, something wrong in his head." My blood ran cold. I ran toward the shed, my exhausted body finding new energy from fear and adrenaline. The shed had a door secured from the outside with a heavy wooden bar. With trembling hands, I lifted the bar and pulled the door open. The smell hit me first, Unwashed body, human waste, decay. The interior was dark, but in the fading sunlight, I could make out a figure huddled in the corner. "Hannah," my voice broke. "Hannah, it's me. It's Samuel." The figure stirred, turning toward me. In the dim light, I saw my wife, but I barely recognized her. She was emaciated, her clothes in rags, her hair matted and filthy. But it was her eyes that broke my heart. They were vacant, distant, as if she had retreated somewhere deep inside herself where the horror couldn't reach. "Samuel?" The word was barely a whisper, as if she didn't quite believe I was real. "Oh God, Hannah, what happened? Who did this to you?" But even as I asked, I knew. Bessie had told me Junior had done this. I helped Hannah to her feet. She could barely stand, leaning heavily on me. I guided her out of that horrible shed and into the fresh air. Bessie had brought water and a blanket, and together we helped Hannah drink and covered her with the blanket. "How long has she been in there?" I asked Bessie, my voice tight with rage. "Over a year," Bessie said quietly. Junior claimed she was having spells, getting violent, that it was for her own safety and everyone else's. Master Hartwell believed him because Junior is so well-spoken and seems so reasonable, and Hannah, after a while in there, she did start acting strange. It seemed to prove Junior right. "Where is he? Where is Junior?" "Working in the big house. He's Master Hartwell's personal servant now, favorite of the family. They say he's the smartest Negro they've ever seen." The irony was bitter. My son had risen to a position of relative privilege while imprisoning his own mother in a shed. I left Hannah with Bessie and stormed toward the big house. Propriety and safety be damned. I found Junior in the main house, setting the table for dinner. He was 16 now, tall and well-built, wearing clean clothes much finer than what most enslaved people were given. When he saw me, his expression didn't change. No surprise, no joy, no guilt, nothing. "Hello, Father," he said calmly. "We heard you were dead." "I'm alive. And I found your mother locked in a shed like an animal. What have you done?" Junior continued arranging silverware, not even looking at me. Mother became difficult. She needed to be restrained for everyone's safety. "Difficult? Your mother? Hannah is the gentlest—" "She kept talking about you," Junior interrupted. "Kept crying and saying she wanted to find you. It was disruptive. It upset the mistress. It made the other servants uncomfortable. I did what was necessary to maintain order." I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face. "You put your own mother in a shed. You left her there to rot. I brought her food, water. She was adequately maintained." "Adequately maintained?" I repeated, my voice rising. "She's not livestock. She's your mother." "She's a slave," Junior said, finally looking at me, and his eyes were completely cold. "We're all slaves. Sentiment doesn't change that. I did what was practical." Master Hartwell appeared in the doorway, alerted by the raised voices. "What's going on here? Samuel, is that you?" I had to make an instant calculation. As an enslaved man, I had no rights. If I accused Junior, it would be my word against his, and Junior had clearly ingratiated himself with the Hartwell family. Any accusation could result in punishment for me. But I had to try. "Master Hartwell," I said, forcing my voice to be respectful, "I've just returned from the fortifications. I came to see my wife Hannah and found her locked in a shed, barely alive. Junior says he put her there." Master Hartwell looked at Junior. "Is this true?" "Yes, sir," Junior said calmly. "Hannah became unstable about a year ago. She was neglecting her duties, causing disturbances, talking irrationally about running off to find her husband. For the safety of the household, and for her own safety, I suggested she be separated until she regained her senses. You agreed, sir." I could see the manipulation. Junior had positioned himself as the reasonable one, making a difficult but necessary decision with Master Hartwell's approval. And Master Hartwell, faced with the choice of believing his favored house servant or admitting he had made a terrible error in judgment, chose the path of least resistance. "I remember," Master Hartwell said slowly. "Junior came to me quite concerned about his mother's behavior. He suggested the separation as a temporary measure." "A year is temporary, Master?" I asked, pushing the boundaries of what I could safely say. "She's been locked away for a year while I was gone, starved and left in her own filth?" She was fed regularly, Junior interjected smoothly. Any deterioration in her condition was the result of her own mental state, not neglect. You lying... I started to move toward Junior, but Master Hartwell stepped between us. That's enough, Samuel. I understand you're upset after being away so long, but you will not raise your voice or threaten violence in my house. Junior was trying to help. Perhaps his solution wasn't perfect, but his intentions were good. I saw then how thoroughly Junior had played the situation. He had become invaluable to the Hartwell family, had made himself seem indispensable, had cultivated an image of being the most intelligent and reasonable enslaved person they'd ever encountered. Against that, my accusation seemed like the ravings of an angry, exhausted man who had just returned from 3 years of hard labor. Master Hartwell, I said, choosing my words carefully, might I ask permission to take Hannah back to Thornhill Plantation with me? Master Thornhill has given me permission to visit. Perhaps if she's with her husband, her condition will improve. This was a significant request. Moving an enslaved person from one plantation to another required negotiation between owners. But Master Hartwell seemed eager to resolve the situation. I'll send a message to Thornhill. If he's agreeable, we can arrange a transfer of ownership. To be honest, Samuel, Hannah hasn't been much use to us in her current state. If Thornhill is willing to take her, it might be for the best. And Junior? I asked. He's my son. I'd like him to come as well. Absolutely not, Master Hartwell said firmly. Junior is far too valuable. He's being trained as my personal secretary. He can read, write, calculate. He's extraordinary. He stays here. I looked at Junior, this son who had tortured his own mother and showed no remorse, who was even now being rewarded for his calculated cruelty. Junior, do you have anything to say to your mother? Any explanation? Mother knows I did what was necessary, Junior said calmly. I harbor no ill will toward her. I simply made the logical choice given the circumstances. The complete absence of feeling in his voice, the cold rationality with which he discussed imprisoning his own mother. It was more chilling than any outward cruelty would have been. I realized then that Hannah and I had been right to worry all those years. Junior wasn't just emotionally guarded or calculating as a survival mechanism. Something fundamental was missing in him, some essential human capacity for empathy and love. I'll be taking your mother away from here, I said to him. You'll probably never see her again. Does that mean anything to you? Junior considered this for a moment. Not particularly. We were never especially close. There it was, the final confirmation of what he was. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore, and went back to where Bessie was caring for Hannah. The next weeks were consumed with the practicalities of Hannah's transfer to Thornhill Plantation and her recovery. Master Thornhill, after some negotiation with Master Hartwell, agreed to purchase Hannah. The price was low. She was considered damaged goods, unlikely to be productive in her current state. But Master Thornhill agreed partly out of consideration for me. I had been a valuable worker before being hired out, and partly because he calculated that having husband and wife together on his property would make me more stable and less likely to cause problems. I was given a cabin that Hannah and I could share. It was the first time in our 15-year marriage that we had been allowed to live together full-time rather than maintaining a broad marriage across 2 plantations. It should have been a blessing, but the circumstances were too tragic for joy. Hannah's physical recovery was slow but steady. With regular food, clean water, and basic care, she began to regain strength. But her mental and emotional recovery was more complicated. She had nightmares. She would wake screaming, convinced she was back in the shed. She flinched at sudden movements. She cried often, sometimes for hours, and she blamed herself. I raised him wrong, she would say, tears streaming down her face. I must have done something wrong for him to turn out like that. No, I would tell her firmly. Hannah, you were the best mother any child could ask for. What Junior is, that's not your fault. That's not something you could have created or prevented. But he's our son, our flesh and blood. How can he be so empty? I don't know, I admitted. But I saw it in him even when he was young. You saw it too. We just didn't want to believe it. We thought love would be enough to reach him, but some people are born without the capacity to love back. It was a harsh truth, but I believed it. Junior had been born without something essential: empathy, conscience, the ability to care about others' suffering. We couldn't have created that absence, and we couldn't have filled it. He called me a disruption, Hannah said one night. Said I was impractical and emotional, as if loving your husband, missing your husband, is some kind of weakness. To him, it probably is, I said. He doesn't understand love because he doesn't feel it, so to him, it seems irrational and pointless. Is he right? Hannah asked. Is love irrational in our situation? We're slaves. We have no power, no rights, no future. Maybe caring about each other is just setting ourselves up for more pain. No, I said fiercely. Love is what makes us human. It's what separates us from, I almost said from Junior, but stopped myself. It's what makes suffering bearable. These 3 years apart, the only thing that kept me alive was knowing you were here, loving you, wanting to get back to you. Without that, I would have been just a body doing labor until it gave out. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm glad you came back, even though what you came back to wasn't what you left, even though I'm broken now. You're not broken, I said, pulling her close. You're wounded. There's a difference. Broken can't be mended. Wounded can heal. Over the months, Hannah did heal, at least somewhat. She never fully recovered the spirit she'd had before. There was a sadness in her now that never entirely lifted, a wariness that hadn't been there before. But she rebuilt herself, found ways to cope, learned to live with what had been done to her. We never saw or heard from Junior again. The Hartwell plantation was only 3 miles away, but it might as well have been 1,000. Junior made no attempt to contact us, showed no interest in whether his mother had recovered, sent no messages of any kind. To him, we had simply ceased to exist, and he carried on with his life without a backward glance. We heard about him occasionally through the network of communication that existed among enslaved people across different plantations. Junior rose rapidly in the Hartwell household, becoming Master Hartwell's most trusted servant. He learned to read and write at an advanced level. He managed household accounts. He was eventually made the head house servant, a position of significant responsibility and relative privilege within the enslaved community. He also married a young woman named Sarah, who belonged to the Hartwells. Hannah wept when she heard that news, crying for the daughter-in-law she would never meet, for the grandchildren who would grow up never knowing their grandparents, for the family connection that had been severed. Do you think he treats her well? Hannah asked me. Sarah, his wife? I thought about Junior's complete lack of empathy, his cold calculation, his ability to imprison his own mother without a flicker of remorse. I don't know, I said honestly. I hope so, but Hannah, he's not capable of love. Whatever their marriage is, it won't be based on genuine feeling. She doesn't know that, Hannah said. She probably thinks she married a good man, a smart man who will have a better life than most enslaved people. She has no idea what he really is. It was true and tragic, but there was nothing we could do. We were enslaved people with no power, no rights, no ability to intervene in anyone else's life when we could barely control our own. Hannah and I lived together on Thornhill Plantation for the next 18 years. They weren't easy years. Slavery is never easy, and we carried the scars of what Junior had done. But we had each other, and that was more than many enslaved people were allowed. I worked as a carpenter and blacksmith, using the skills I had maintained even through 3 years of brutal fortification work. Hannah worked in the quarters, helping with cooking and healing. She had skills with herbs and medicine that made her valuable to the community. We created a life within the narrow confines permitted to us. We never had other children. Partly this was because Hannah was 35 when we were finally allowed to live together full-time, and conception became less likely with age. But partly it was choice. Neither of us could bear the thought of raising another child who might turn out like Junior, or of bringing a child into slavery, knowing they could be sold away from us at any moment. Master Thornhill died in 1825, and his son William took over the plantation. William Thornhill was younger and more influenced by the growing abolitionist sentiment in parts of the country, though he wasn't willing to free his slaves. But he did implement slightly better conditions, better food, less brutal punishment, and, in some cases, allowing enslaved families to buy their freedom if they could accumulate enough money. Hannah and I began saving every penny we could earn from extra work. I would do carpentry for neighboring farms on Sundays and keep a small portion of the payment. Hannah would sell herbs and remedies. It was painfully slow. In 5 years, we had accumulated only about $40, and we needed several hundred to purchase our freedom. We were 55 years old and beginning to accept that we would likely die enslaved when everything changed again. In 1831, Nat Turner's rebellion occurred in Southampton County, Virginia, not far from where we lived. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, but it sent shockwaves of fear through white Virginia. Laws restricting enslaved people became even harsher. Paranoia increased. And ironically, it also made some slaveholders more willing to free elderly slaves they viewed as potential security risks. William Thornhill, frightened by the rebellion and the violence of its suppression, decided to free several of his older enslaved people rather than risk them being involved in future uprisings. At 58 and 55, with no children who could be used as leverage against us, Hannah and I were among those he freed. It wasn't pure altruism. He calculated that elderly freed slaves were less likely to cause problems than elderly enslaved people, and freeing us removed any potential liability. But whatever his reasoning, the result was the same. In 1832, after 58 years of enslavement, I was legally free. So was Hannah after 55 years in bondage. We moved to Richmond, where there was a community of free black people who helped each other survive in a world that was only marginally less hostile to free blacks than to enslaved ones. I found work as a carpenter. Hannah continued her healing work. We lived in a small room, but it was ours. We could come and go as we pleased. We could make our own decisions. It wasn't full freedom. Free black people in Virginia faced enormous restrictions and constant threat of being kidnapped and re-enslaved. But compared to bondage, it was paradise. We were free for 8 years. 8 precious years where we lived as husband and wife without a master's permission, where we could sit together in the evening without fearing that one of us would be sold away, where we could speak freely without worrying about who might overhear. In those years, we occasionally heard news of Junior. He had been freed by the Hartwells in their will when Master Hartwell died in 1835. Junior, along with his wife Sarah and their 3 children, had moved to Philadelphia, where he had established himself as a successful merchant. He had property, business interests, and a reputation as a shrewd and intelligent businessman. Hannah cried when we heard he was free, but they were complicated tears. Joy that he had escaped slavery, sorrow that he had never once tried to contact us, anger at what he had done to her, grief for the relationship that could never be. "Should we try to contact him?" she asked me. "He's in Philadelphia. We could write." "Do you want to?" I asked gently. She thought for a long time. "No," she finally said. "He's not our son anymore. Maybe he never was. The son I imagined, the son I hoped he would become, that person doesn't exist. The real Junior is a stranger, a dangerous stranger. Let him live his life. We'll live ours." It was the right decision, though it cost her to make it. Junior had made his choice when he locked his mother in a shed and walked away without remorse. We had to accept that and move forward without him. Hannah died in 1838 at the age of 61. It was pneumonia, quick and relatively peaceful. I held her hand as she passed, grateful that she died free, that our last years together had been spent in freedom rather than bondage. I lived another 2 years after her death. I was 67 when I died in 1840, also of pneumonia. In my final days, I thought often about my life, 58 years as an enslaved man, 3 years hired out to brutal labor, 8 years of freedom. Such a small portion of my life spent free. And yet those 8 years with Hannah counted for more than all the decades that came before. I thought about Junior too. I wondered if he ever thought about us, about what he had done. I wondered if, in whatever success he had achieved, he ever felt a moment of remorse or regret. But I doubted it. People like Junior, people born without the capacity for empathy, don't feel remorse. They move through the world taking what they want, using whoever is useful, discarding anyone who isn't, and never looking back. The cruelest irony is that Junior probably prospered precisely because of what he was. In a world as brutal and unjust as the one we lived in, the ability to be cold and calculating, to view people as resources rather than humans, to feel no guilt about advancing yourself at others' expense, those qualities could be advantages. Junior had thrived in slavery and would likely thrive in freedom, not despite his lack of empathy, but because of it. Meanwhile, Hannah and I, who loved each other deeply, who felt the suffering of others, who maintained our humanity despite everything slavery tried to do to strip it away, we had suffered enormously. Our love for each other had caused us pain every time we were separated, every time we feared for each other, every time we imagined what might be happening to the other. But I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade one moment of genuine feeling, one moment of true love, for all of Junior's cold success. Because in the end, what makes us human isn't our intelligence or our success. It's our capacity to love, to suffer, to care about others, even when it costs us. This is my testimony, written with the help of a friend in my final days. That I was enslaved for most of my life, that I survived horrors that broke stronger men, that I was separated from my wife for 3 years and returned to find she had been tortured by our own son, but also that Hannah and I loved each other through it all, that we found moments of joy even in bondage, that we died free and together, and that our son, who tortured his mother and felt nothing, who achieved success and comfort while leaving destruction in his wake, he won in the world's eyes but lost something infinitely more valuable. He lost his humanity if he ever had it. He won prosperity but would never know love. I returned from forced labor in 1812 and found my wife locked in a basement left there by our son. It was the greatest horror of my life, but Hannah and I survived it. We survived everything slavery threw at us. We lived to see freedom, however briefly. That survival, that love, that humanity we maintained against all odds, that is our legacy. Junior may have prospered, but we triumphed in the ways that truly matter.